Humaira's life changed on the day her father passed away. Until then, she had been a determined young woman, nurturing a dream of becoming a doctor. She was studying with the help of scholarships and her own relentless hard work. Her father used to encourage her, reminding her that education would open the doors to a better life, not only for herself but also for her younger sisters. His words often gave her strength when the weight of responsibility felt heavy. But his sudden departure left the family in ruins, and Humaira's world collapsed. As the eldest of 5 sisters, Humaira suddenly found herself in a role she was not prepared for. The household's stability crumbled. Their modest life became even more fragile, and her mother, already suffering from diabetes, struggled to cope with the stress of losing her husband. Humaira's sisters were all growing, each one dependent on her to carry the load their father once bore. At first, she tried to continue her studies, believing that somehow she could juggle both education and family obligations. But the reality was harsher than she had imagined. Bills piled up, her mother's medicines ran out, and her sister's education was put on hold. For a few weeks, Humaira remained lost, unsure how to move forward. She remembered her father's face, his gentle smile, and the pride he carried in her achievements. Each memory made her heart ache, but they also reminded her of the impossible choice she now had to make. One evening, after watching her mother wince in pain without proper medication, she realized she could no longer delay. She abandoned her dream of completing medical school. It was not a decision made out of weakness, but one forced by circumstance, a painful sacrifice that still stung whenever she thought of the future she had given up. Determined to find a way to support her family, Humaira began giving home tuitions. She cleared one corner of their small house, placing a few chairs and a wooden table, and invited neighborhood children for lessons. She poured her heart into teaching, working tirelessly from morning until evening. But the money she earned was nowhere near enough to sustain the household. Her mother's condition worsened, and her sister's needs grew. Each night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer she could keep the fragile balance from breaking. This was the first turning point in Humaira's life. The moment when her father's death forced her to abandon her identity as a student and step into the role of caretaker. She did not know that the choices she would soon make in desperation would take her down a path she had never imagined, one filled with shadows that would haunt her for years to come. Humaira's life after leaving her studies was a constant battle between survival and despair. Tutoring neighborhood children kept her occupied, but the income was never enough to cover the rising costs of food, medicines, and her sister's school fees. Every time she handed her mother half-filled medicine packets or told her younger sisters that new books would have to wait, she felt as though she was failing them. The pressure built quietly, pressing on her shoulders day and night. One evening, while sitting alone after her lessons, a relative suggested something that would change her course entirely. "Why don't you open a clinic?" they said. "People won't know you haven't completed your degree yet. You already know enough. With just a few months left in your graduation, it won't matter." At first, Humaira resisted. She was terrified of being exposed, of committing herself to something she was not yet qualified to do. But the suggestion lodged itself in her mind and refused to leave. Each time she looked at her mother's frail figure or her sister's longing faces, the idea began to seem less like fraud and more like necessity. Not long after, fate presented her with another push. A journalist she met casually offered her his card, assuring her that if anyone tried to trouble her, she could use his name for protection. Though she could not understand why his words gave her courage, they did. With a mixture of fear and determination, she decided to take the risk. She borrowed money from acquaintances, pawned what little jewelry remained, and set up a small clinic in a quiet street. At first, the clinic was deserted. Hours went by without a single patient. Humaira would sit at the desk, staring at the empty walls, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Nights became heavy with regret. She feared she had wasted the little money she had gathered and dragged her family further into debt. But slowly, as weeks passed, people began to come. A child with a fever, a woman with recurring headaches, an elderly man seeking advice. Each case gave her the chance to prove herself, even if only halfway. Word spread that she was attentive, that her treatments worked, and soon her clinic began to fill with patients. With every prescription written and every relieved smile, Humaira felt a fragile sense of hope. For the first time since her father's death, she could provide for her family without begging for help. She bought her mother's medicines on time, filled the kitchen shelves, and even promised her sisters new clothes. Yet in the quiet of night, she could not silence the truth inside her heart. Her foundation was built on a lie. This fragile balance would not last. She did not know it yet, but her clinic would soon become the doorway to decisions far darker than she could imagine. The clinic had just begun to steady Humaira's fragile world when temptation knocked for the first time. It was late in the evening, just as she was preparing to close, when two women entered hurriedly. One was young, barely more than a girl, and the other appeared older, perhaps a hostel warden. Their faces were tense, their voices low, as if every sound carried danger. The older woman leaned forward and whispered, "We need your help." "The girl, she is pregnant. We want you to end it." The words froze Humaira. Her heart raced, and for a brief moment she felt the walls of the clinic closing in on her. She shook her head quickly. "No, I don't do that. It's too risky. It's illegal. Find someone else." But the woman insisted, pressing her palms together. "No one will ever know. We will pay you whatever you ask. Just help us." Humaira's mind spun. She knew what they were asking was wrong, not only by law, but by conscience. Yet the mention of payment made her falter. She had no idea how much money they were willing to give, but the thought of relief from her constant struggle tempted her. Finally, almost without thinking, she blurted out, 50,000? She expected laughter, a scoff, or at least hesitation. But instead, the woman calmly opened her purse, pulled out a thick bundle of notes, and placed it in Humaira's trembling hands. Humaira's breath caught. Her fingers shook as she stared at the money. It was more than she had ever held in her life. More than a month's expenses, more than her mother's medical bills combined. Her conscience screamed at her to stop, but the memory of her mother's anxious face and her sister's disappointed eyes drowned that voice. She told herself this was a one-time decision, a desperate act for survival. And so, that night, she crossed the line. The procedure ended without incident. The young girl left relieved, and the warden clasped Humaira's hands with gratitude before disappearing into the night. Humaira, however, sat in silence, unable to feel joy or regret, only emptiness. Later, when she placed the money in her mother's hands, she lied with ease. "It is God's blessing," she said, watching the sparkle of hope return to her mother's eyes. Her sisters laughed and planned new clothes, and her heart ached. But as the rain tapped gently against the clinic's window that night, Humaira realized something terrifying. She had taken her first step into a world where morality could be bought. Those 50,000 rupees were not just money. They were the price of her silence, her integrity, her soul's first compromise. And once a person makes such a trade, the path forward is rarely ever clean again. What Humaira had once promised herself would be a single mistake soon became a dangerous routine. In the beginning, she tried to believe that the incident with the hostel girl was an exception, a one-time fall into weakness. But just a week later, another woman appeared at her clinic with the same desperate request. The hesitation that had shaken Humaira before was still there, yet it was weaker. Her conscience still tugged at her, whispering that she was treading a forbidden path, but the sight of folded hands and pleading eyes made her falter. Once again, she accepted the money. After that, the visits became more frequent. At first, it was once a week, then every few days. Different faces arrived, frightened young students, anxious wives, women from wealthy households who didn't want their mistakes revealed. All of them carried the same desperation, the same fear of exposure, and all of them were willing to pay whatever Humaira demanded. Each case left her slightly more numb, slightly less conflicted. She began to view the transactions in mechanical terms. A girl would arrive, the bargain would be struck, the work would be done, and the money would land in her drawer. With every envelope handed to her, she pushed her guilt deeper into silence. She told herself she was helping these women, shielding them from shame that society would never forgive. It became easier to justify her actions when she saw the gratitude in their eyes, even though she knew she was part of their downfall. The money transformed her home quickly. Her mother's medical care improved, her sisters returned to school, and the kitchen shelves were no longer empty. There were new clothes, new shoes, even smartphones for her sisters. Her household, once weighed down by grief and poverty, began to taste comfort again. Her family praised her, believing she had become a successful doctor. Only Humaira knew the truth, that her success was built on lies and the silent cries of young women. Still, at night, when the house was quiet, memories of her father returned. She imagined his proud eyes watching her, and shame flooded her heart. She squeezed her eyes shut, telling herself it was all for survival, all for her family. Yet in the depths of her soul, she knew she was sinking further into a pit she could not easily climb out of. What began as one compromise was now turning into a cycle, pulling her deeper each day. Humaira was no longer a girl making an occasional mistake. She was becoming a woman caught in a pattern of decisions that chained her to guilt and secrecy. The line between survival and corruption was blurring, and she was losing the ability to see it clearly. As the months slipped into years, Humaira's work transformed into something mechanical. What once made her hands tremble now barely stirred a thought. Girls came in crying, mothers pleaded, older women bargained, yet to Humaira each face began to look the same. She had trained herself to detach. She would name her price, perform the procedure, and watch the money slide across the desk. No emotion, no hesitation, just a process that had become her second nature. At first, she thought this new numbness was strength. It allowed her to function without being torn apart by guilt each time. But in truth, it was a hollowing process. Every time she silenced her conscience, another piece of her humanity withered away. She began to feel like a machine, efficient, reliable, and utterly cold inside. The stream of clients grew diverse. It was no longer only frightened, hostile girls or women from modest families. Now, women from affluent households came, often in expensive cars veiled heavily to hide their identity. They whispered requests with trembling voices, but their wallets were steady and full. Some even called her in advance from private numbers, offering to pay double for secrecy. Humaira accepted all of it without a flicker of emotion. She told herself she was just doing her job. At home, the illusion of success blossomed further. The household lived in comfort, the sisters thrived in school, and her mother's health improved. Yet in the quiet of night, Humaira often felt like a stranger in her own home. She watched her sisters laugh and gossip over their new phones, oblivious to the sacrifices made for their joy. They looked at her as a strong provider, never guessing the shadows she carried on her back. Sometimes, when her mother's eyes lingered on her with gratitude, Humaira felt a knife twist in her chest. She longed to confess, to unburden herself, but the fear of breaking her mother's fragile peace silenced her. So she carried the secret alone, pretending that her success was born of talent and effort, yet the cracks showed in her private moments. At night, she lay restless, memories of her father's voice haunting her like a ghost. She tried to remind herself of the family's comfort, but it no longer soothed her the way it once did. Her prosperity had begun to feel like a curse, bought with the cries of girls who left her clinic hollow and broken. The worst realization was that she could not stop. What had begun as a desperate decision had become her reality. The money was addictive, the demands never-ending, and her family too dependent on her income. Humaira told herself she was still in control, but deep down, she knew the truth. The cycle now controlled her. One rainy night when the clinic was about to close, the bell at the door rang. Humaira was tired and ready to lock up, but the urgency in the visitor's voice made her pause. A middle-aged man entered, his face drawn with stress. Behind him stood a girl completely covered in a veil, her body trembling as though the very walls of the clinic terrified her. The man wasted no time. "There's a case," he said quickly. "I need it done tonight. I'll pay whatever it takes for Humaira." Such words were no longer shocking. She named her price, 20,000, and he agreed instantly. A flicker of suspicion passed through her mind. Men this desperate usually offered more without being asked. Still, she brushed the thought aside, calling her assistant back to the clinic. Her mother's calls buzzed on her phone at that moment, but she silenced them, telling herself she would return them later. Work came first. The man gestured toward the veiled girl. "She will go inside with you," he said. Humaira studied her carefully. There was something in the girl's hesitant steps, the way her shoulders hunched, that stirred unease in her. But Humaira had trained herself to ignore feelings. She motioned toward the consultation room, determined to finish quickly. Her phone buzzed again. Finally, irritated, she picked it up. Her mother's panicked voice echoed in her ear. "Saira hasn't come home from college." "It's late, and no one can find her. We are searching everywhere." The words made Humaira's blood run cold. She froze where she stood, gripping the phone tightly. Fear pressed against her chest. Her mother continued, "We found some hints from her phone. She has been meeting an older man. We never imagined she could do something like this." Humaira's knees weakened. She turned slowly toward the girl sitting in silence, her small frame shaking with muffled sobs. A dreadful thought gripped her heart. She stepped closer, her voice trembling now. "Remove your veil," she demanded. The girl's hands quivered as she slowly pulled the fabric away. In that instant, Humaira's world shattered. The face beneath was not a stranger's, it was her own sister, Saira. Humaira's breath caught in her throat. The phone slipped from her hands and crashed onto the floor. For a moment she could not move, could not speak. Her eyes widened in disbelief as Saira broke into sobs. "Forgive me, sister," she cried, her voice raw with shame. "Please forgive me." Humaira staggered back, clutching her chest as though struck by lightning. The very cycle she had built to save her family had swallowed her own blood. In that moment, she realized the nightmare she had created was no longer just her secret. It was now her family's tragedy. The sight of Saira's tear-stained face ignited a storm inside Humaira. Her body shook with rage, grief, and disbelief all at once. She had spent years sacrificing her own dreams, carrying the family's burden, drowning herself in guilt and compromises, only to see her younger sister walk blindly into ruin. Humaira's voice thundered through the room before she could control it. "This is what you call love? This is how you repay our father's sacrifice? By throwing away your dignity for a man twice your age?" Saira collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching Humaira's feet as though holding on to the last shred of hope. "I was blind, sister," she cried. "He promised marriage." "I believed him. I thought he cared for me." Her words pierced Humaira's heart, but the fury in her chest refused to fade. She pulled her sister to her feet and shook her shoulders, her eyes burning with betrayal. "Marriage? Do you not see? He lured you, deceived you, used your innocence, and you followed him like a lamb to slaughter. Have you no sense of shame? Have you no thought for your family?" Her voice cracked under the weight of her own pain. In that moment, Humaira felt as though every sleepless night, every lie told, every sin committed had led to this unbearable humiliation. She wanted to scream, to curse her sister, to collapse into despair. But beneath the fury, another force battled to rise. Love. Saira's trembling hands reached out, her eyes swollen with regret. "I know I was wrong. I know I betrayed your trust. But I am terrified. Please save me. I don't know where else to turn." Humaira froze, her breath heavy. She looked into Saira's eyes and saw the same fear she had seen in countless other girls. The desperation, the helplessness, the silent plea for protection. But this time, it was her own sister. The anger in her heart collided violently with the instinct to shield her. For a long moment, the room was filled only with the sound of Saira's sobs. Humaira pressed her palms against her temples, struggling to steady herself. She wanted to reject her, to let the man face justice, to let Saira taste the consequences. Yet she knew the truth. Exposing this would destroy her sister, her mother, and their entire family. Finally, her shoulders slumped. Her voice, still hard but steadier, broke the silence. "Enough crying, what's done is done. From this moment, you are under my protection. I will save your honor even if it tears me apart. But you must never forget. This mistake nearly destroyed us all." In that moment, Humaira's role shifted again. She was no longer just the provider or the sister. She became the shield, the only wall between Saira's fragile dignity and a society eager to tear it apart. After the veil was lifted and the truth burned into her eyes, Humaira knew there was no time for hesitation. She could not allow her sister to be further humiliated. Her heart ached, her hands trembled, but her mind sharpened with determination. She turned to the older man who had brought Saira into the clinic. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously as though he sensed that his secret was on the edge of collapse. Humaira rose to her full height, her voice cold and cutting. "How dare you?" she demanded. "You have daughters of your own, yet you bring another man's child here to cover your sins. Do you not feel shame? Do you not fear the day your own family learns what you have done?" The man's bravado crumbled instantly. He dropped his gaze, his lips fumbling over excuses, and then he fell into pleas. "Please, don't tell anyone. For the sake of my wife, my children, keep this hidden. I will never come near her again." Humaira's fury boiled, but she knew anger alone would not protect Saira. She leaned closer, her voice like steel. "If you dare to approach her again, if you so much as try to speak her name, I will walk to your home myself and reveal everything to your family. This is your only warning." Her words cut deep. The man's shoulders slumped, his hands folded in desperation, and within moments he stumbled out of the clinic, too frightened to argue further. Left behind, Saira wept quietly, her face buried in her hands. Humaira knelt beside her, pulling her close despite the whirlwind inside her chest. "It's over," she whispered, though her own voice trembled. "You are safe now. But never again will you let yourself be deceived. Never again will you give someone the power to destroy you." Back home, the storm was not over. Their mother, unaware of the full truth, insisted that Saira should be married off quickly before rumors could spread. "A husband will cover the shame," she argued desperately. But Humaira refused. The rage inside her turned into resolve. "No," she declared, "we will not bury one mistake beneath another. We will not deceive someone else's family just to hide our own wounds. Enough lies, enough compromises." For the first time, her voice carried finality that silenced the room. She had protected her sister's honor, but at a cost. She now carried the weight of the secret alone, knowing it would live within her like an unhealed scar. That night, as the house lay in uneasy silence, Humaira understood one thing clearly. Her life of shadows had reached its breaking point. Either she would continue to drown in deceit, or she would find the courage to walk away from it all. The incident with Saira left Humaira shaken to her core. For days, her mind replayed the moment she had seen her sister's face beneath the veil. It was as though destiny had forced a mirror in front of her, showing her what her choices had led to. She realized she could no longer hide behind excuses of survival or family need. If she continued down the same path, she would lose everything: her sisters, her dignity, and whatever fragments of her soul remained. With heavy determination, Humaira made her decision. She would walk away from the clinic, no matter how much money it brought or how many problems it seemed to solve. She began working tirelessly to repay the loans she had taken, cutting back on expenses, living with restraint. Every time she performed another procedure, she reminded herself that it was one of the last. Each case felt like a chain she was determined to break. At last, the day came when the final debt was cleared. She shut the doors of the clinic for good, locking away years of secrecy, shame, and compromises. She vowed never to reopen them again. The next chapter of her life was not easy. Without the income from the clinic, the family had to adjust to a simpler lifestyle. But Humaira refused to give in to despair. She used her savings to open a small general store selling everyday goods. It was honest work, humble, steady, and free from shadows. With each sale, she felt a strange peace settle inside her, the kind of peace she had not felt for years. Saira, too, had changed. The trauma had sobered her, and she carried herself with greater humility and maturity. She spent long hours in reflection, whispering prayers for forgiveness, seeking strength to rebuild her future with dignity. Humaira stood beside her, guiding her with firm love, no longer just an elder sister, but a guardian determined to shield her from harm. Time slowly softened the wounds. Neighbors began to notice the change. Where whispers of envy and doubt once followed Humaira, now respect and admiration returned. People saw her working hard in her little shop, never asking for favors, never cutting corners. For her sisters, she became a living example that honesty may be harder, but always leads to peace. One quiet evening, as Humaira locked her store and walked home, she felt the cool night breeze brush against her face. For the first time in years, her heart was light. She thought of her father and whispered silently, "I stumbled, but I found my way back." She knew her past could never be erased, but it had shaped her into the woman she was now, stronger, wiser, and determined to live in truth. Her story was no longer about shame, it was about redemption.